Hello and welcome to the Photo Files and this episode of Unfiltered and Undeveloped. This series is an unedited, kind of free-form, deep dive exploration into topics in photography. Today's topic is on the decisive moment and what Henri Cartier-Bresson really meant by it, and what are the common misconceptions about it, and what was my first experience with that concept. The decisive moment is a concept that is thrown around a lot by a lot of photographers. I think whether or not they have, actually read the article by Henri Cartier-Bresson, the decisive moment. And like so many things, there are a lot of opinions about what that means, and what he meant by it that may or may not reference, what he was really doing. And things can be oversimplified. And I think for him, he was very much talking about the alignment of, action and geometry and composition kind of all coming into place. And that moment being the decisive moment, that's the moment that we want to capture with the shutter. My first relationship to it and my first understanding of it came from my father, who is the person who taught me photography as a child. And I don't know if I've talked about this too much before, but so my father was an advanced amateur photographer and really quite good. And, primarily did family photography, but he was a dentist also. And so he would take x-rays. And I think that's why so many dentists used to get into photography, because they were already having to use these cameras and had darkrooms in their offices. And so it was sort of a natural progression. But he had the Contax Zeiss system, and in the late 80s moved onto the Canon EF system so he could get the 300 millimeter 2.8 with autofocus that had come out, in order to photograph our sports and things like that. So it was all mostly family photography and family sports photography. And so, and as a kid, what I became interested in was sports photography, and my references being things like Sports Illustrated. I think if I had a goal when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, it would have been to one day, maybe publish a photo in Sports Illustrated. And so I was always looking at those magazines, at the grocery store, and kind of figure out how did they create this image. Why does it look so much sharper than mine? Because it was probably shot on medium format as opposed to 35. And, but just kind of immersing myself in the style and look of that. And that was, I think my goal. And I think the other aspect of that is that as a kid, I'm looking for approval, and I think, what I wanted was my father's approval. Like if he thought my photography was good, then that said something. And because he wasn't very good at connecting with me otherwise, and even with photography, it was kind of a moving target, because I still feel that way. I think every picture I take, I'm probably trying to create one good enough for him to some degree, so every photo I've ever taken falls into that category, which will that'll be when you notice that, it's quite a head scratcher. But that's that's how this goes sometimes. But you can see how this all connects. So my dad had these lenses and was doing sports photography of us, and we also had season tickets to the Texas Rangers baseball team around 1990 through 1992. And so at that time, you could take in a large lens to a baseball game, and nobody cared. I mean, there's no social media or anything. So my dad would bring in his 302.8 to the Rangers games, and we had seats down pretty low. And so he could get, shots that were quite similar to what the press was capturing. And I also would take a camera with a longer, slower zoom lens, and that's one of the cameras that I was learning on. It was a Yashica, I believe 230 AF, but it was one of these. It was a It was I believe it used the Contax Yashica mount, but it had autofocus, and didn't live. It wasn't a platform that survived, but it was actually a pretty decent autofocus SLR for the time. But it was on the drives from school or home to the ball game, or the time before the game would start, like during batting practice, that my dad and I would often talk about photography and be practicing it. And so sometime between 1990 and 1992, when I was between 10 and 12, I don't know exactly how it came about, but we were photographing baseball, and I think I was talking to him and trying to get a sense of, when should I take the picture? Um, and my dad, being born in 1950, very likely read articles by Henri Cartier-Bresson in various photography magazines. Those were syndicated throughout a lot. I don't know if he bought any of his books or not, but reader, and certainly read all of like the modern photography and popular photography magazines in the 50s and 60s. And so at the very least, he was familiar with it and familiar with the concept. I've never asked him if he's actually read the article. But he shared that, at least in his perspective, that, the height of the action, but he didn't actually, I have to give him credit. He didn't really say height of the action. It was, the height of the moment, and that, yeah, you can translate that back to what, Henry was like explicitly saying, where, I mean, if you take into account that the height of the moment is also a geometric shape and part of the composition, you know, and like say in sports, if there's a ball and a player, the relationship between where that ball is in space and the player is in space, the expression, how they move through the frame, that's all part of it. And you could argue that the best looking image is the height of that. And of course, what's interesting is it's always a guess, because the way we take photographs, we're basically predicting what is going to happen in the next very, very short time interval. And so it's not that we know exactly. We are, I think it's through a lot of practice and a lot of paying attention and a lot of human observation that you learn how people tend to move, how their expressions change, how group dynamics work, or in sports, what is likely to happen next. And through that, I think you are really training your body to fire the shutter at the right moment to capture, what you are guessing is going to be the best moment. And you really won't ever, I mean, you never really know. It's just the photograph has to stand on its own. And I think, but for me, my 10, 12-year-old self, I felt like, well, height of the action means I've got to get the ball in the frame if I'm taking a baseball. So it's whether it's a pitch or, swinging it from a bat. I think that's what I felt like, well, if my timing was really good, that's what I could get, which is not quite the right way of thinking about it. But again, I was, 10 or 12. And so I got pretty good. I started using the Canon EOS system around that time. And, it was extraordinarily fast, and those cameras were just so good. The meters were good. It was very easy to use. And my dad had been teaching me, the fundamentals of photography for all of them. I mean, I have some vague recollection of that starting around 5 years old. And I don't know if it was that he was trying to reach me with it, or that it was a shared interest. I don't really, really know. And I think it was largely stuff that he had consumed and was relaying back to me, because I think my whole family is neurospicy, as they like to say. And, there's members of my family that are on the autism spectrum and members of my family that are on the ADHD. And I'm deeply in the ADHD realm. And I suspect that my father is, somewhere in the range of like what Asperger's used to be. This is undiagnosed. This is just my read on it. And with that kind of understanding, going back, I mean, he was going very deep into this subject and kind of imparting it to me, but not, I don't know how much he really fully embodied or internalized. I just know that he was trying to sort of how he approached teaching me. And I knew that he definitely had a lot of respect for photography. He was always reading photography magazines. He really prized the best lenses, and I think he was pretty discerning in with regards to photography itself. So I think he had a good eye for it, and so I think it was one place where the work I could do or the relationship I had with him was maybe something where, again, I thought if I made a picture that impressed my father, that that he would love me the way I hoped he did. And that's just been with me my entire life. I mean, that is, again, that is, for better or worse, been what has always been there when it comes to how I approach photography. And I think the way I thought I could get there was through, taking sports photographs that had, at least what I thought was really great timing. So the ball being in the air, or the players on the field, whether it's baseball or football, being in an interesting shape. And I got, in my teens, I started doing it quite a lot, and I don't know why, but I got, probably because I had been practicing so much, I got quite good at it quite quickly. And I also had, admittedly, better cameras than anybody else in high school. I mean, no one else could go use a Canon EOS-1 and a 300-2.8. I mean, when I was photographing sports, I was photographing right next to the newspaper photographers from our city magazines and using the same gear. And the reality was my photos were just as good, if not better. And if I had wanted to just go down that path at that point and become a newspaper photographer, or whatever, I could have done that. But of course, as a teenager, and I think part of me, was pretty conflicted about photography because it was something my dad and I shared, and I really struggled in my relationship with him. I think. And also because it almost felt like it came easily to me. I decided I didn't want to pursue it professionally early on, and I wanted to try to do something else, even though I was going to college and I'd end up being the head sports photographer there, and shooting a ton. And it was a great experience and taught me a ton. Because I went to Baylor University. We were a Big 12 football team. So I got to photograph all those games, and, both on film, and we were also using the first generation of Nikon's, D1 D1X DSLRs. That's what we had, the school owned. Although at the time none of us really knew how to shoot it well enough yet. We weren't good at doing any kind of raw conversion, and using those cameras was a pain. If anyone else in this video has ever used a 320 megabyte IBM micro drive, please drop a comment below and tell me how many times yours worked. Because it was usually single digits, I feel like, back in the day. And so anyhow, but we had a photo lab on site, and I was, reasonably good at developing. So I go shoot a game, run back to the newspaper office, process all the film, look at it, and whatever I thought was gonna work, start scanning and doing a whole lot of dust and scratch removal in Photoshop, and that was my weekend. But I also got paid for it, so it was a great deal. And it was that was a really great chapter of photography in my life. And it was, we had a daily newspaper, 4 days a week, and so there was a ton of opportunity to be shooting all the time. And While it wasn't hard news, it was, the campus news or sports. And, um, the experience of working with a staff on a newspaper is, if you've never done it, I highly recommend it because it's the camaraderie is, pretty awesome. So going through my outline here, and but I was doing primarily sports. I was pretty focused on sports. I thought it was the most interesting. As a young guy, I thought it was it was the coolest kind of photography, and the kind that most people were pretty interested in, and it was the kind that for a school like ours, like the football picture was going to be the thing that ran on the front page. As I moved on from college, and I don't know at what point, but I think I definitely started photographing different things, and really a whole lot less sports. I guess music is one area where I've done a lot, but also just candid pictures of people, whether it's my family or friends. The kind of the candid moments. And I think what's interesting is that in sports there's this very high intensity, high frequency that you're running at when you're in it, and it's fairly aggressive, and you're constantly seeking these instants to capture, of high interest, and so that's like very intense. But it's also, but it's still capturing a decisive moment, right? It can also be like so loose, and that's where I think with candid pictures of family and friends, or music, or documentary photography, um, I found that often just really being there and really being in the scene, there can be a point when everybody lets their guard down, and magic through facial expressions happens, and this real honesty happens, and it becomes geometrically interesting, and you are part of it and are very fluid with it, and then the pictures just kind of take effortlessly. And it's almost like, and I'm very interested in like how much control we actually have over the timing of the shutter, and how much of it, because I'm also interested in things like free will, and regardless of whether you believe in that or not, there are measurable delays between the time that your brain makes a decision about something and you become aware of it, and it's pretty short. But at the same time, I think that's real. It's shown on MRIs, and so if you apply that to photography, that raises a lot of questions. And I think the only thing that makes sense to me is that we can basically train our nervous system and our body, because as I always say, photography is 100% physical and 100% mental, to take the photograph at the right moment. And so it is at its best, it's something very along the lines of being subconscious. And if you look at Zen and the art of at blank, often things like that are kind of just getting into that very, very flow state is often sort of described as, instead of you taking the picture just takes. And what I think is the best photograph I've ever taken meets that criteria. And so it's when you are most in harmony, I think, with the moment, and you've got you're in the right place. I like to say that a good photographer knows where to stand. I think that is a fundamental aspect of it. And you've got to get a lot of other things right, but I think it's interesting how differently you can approach different subjects, and what the decisive moment sort of means within genres. What does it mean in a landscape? There's still something about taking it at the right time of day, but if nothing's moving in the shot, what is, what does that mean? How long is a decisive? What is the interval? The good thing is it's not really an answerable question, and it's, whether or not even there is such a thing as a decisive moment. I mean, we can say that there is, but that's, just because we've got, an article by Henri Cartier-Bresson doesn't mean that he is not the authority on this. There are no authorities in this space. He's just, I think, often referenced because he's particularly good at expressing the concepts in an approach to photography much better than really anyone else I've seen. I think he doesn't have to be necessarily right. It doesn't have to. I don't think that he would even say that he was. It's, but he makes a good case for the way he approaches it, and it's. I find it very relatable, and he talks a lot about psychology, and how to approach subjects, and all of those things in ways that I think a lot of good photographers kind of pick up or notice naturally if they are good at it. But I still have often, not really ever seen anyone express it kind of the way he does, and so it's just. It's interesting to consider, is the decisive moment just this elusive thing that we're chasing? Do you ever know if you've got it? Is it like, Camelot, the Fountain of Youth, just this an imaginary place that doesn't really exist, but it seems like it's, possible, or just over the hill? I don't even know if that matters, but it does seem to be a useful. It's almost like it doesn't matter if it's real or not. It's a useful thought experiment, or it's a useful way to think about photography, or aspects of it, just because it's pretty understandable by just about anybody, and regardless of how much time you've spent in photography, and whether you've done a lot or you're brand new to it. It's rather easy to absorb, I think, just on the surface level anyway, and it's a useful thing to be thinking about when you think about nowadays, like with some of these Sony cameras, and I mean, and the burst rates, and the that we can capture still frames now is just getting absurd. I mean, I follow this stuff, but I can't keep up with how fast it's getting. I primarily because I don't really care. If I were a sports journalist nowadays, I probably would care. But I also don't quite get it. I mean, I think that I don't understand the appeal unless you're doing technical photography. For technical stuff, I can see it having a totally valid use for that. If you wanted to photograph a machine moving or something, but for capturing a sports event, I mean, just holding down the shutter and letting it capture as many frames as possible, it's not that you won't get a good photograph out of it. I just think that in my opinion, in every case, I would rather go in and take one shot that I, however much I'm in control of when I hit the shutter, that I picked. And like, I'd bet on that every time, because it's impossible to me to think that you could be getting the best of what is there. It's not a matter of just getting every moment. It really, like, there's a perfect spot in theory that you could capture that is going to be in between those frames, and maybe overlap it a little bit, but like it's the other problem is you can't be trying to maximize your composition and geometry if you're just doing a spray and pray sort of exercise. There's just no way you could be in the right spot in my view on it. So you can definitely do things like get the ball in the frame out of a pitcher's hand, but I could do that with an EOS-1 back in 1995. And I'll put some of my. I'm not. This is not an edited piece per se. I'm going to cut out the gaps, but I'll also drop in some of my photography from my high school photography portfolio. So this is sports photography, primarily from the late 90s. And, it's, you can see what I was going for at the time. And it's the kind of stuff that, would have run in Sports Illustrated. And, it ended up, being very successful for me, and it opened, a lot of doors. I was able to go where I wanted to go with photography, really, from early on. And again, I think that's part of why I didn't appreciate it. But, I'm certainly not the first person to fall into that bucket. And so, anyhow, I think this is there's so much to say on it, and it's just something that I like to think about all the time. And it's one of those just ideas that kind of always comes back up and up, and I find it interesting to think about, what do I think about it today? What's my relationship to it today? How is it, and how often am I keeping it in mind, and or but ideally then, like, getting into that place where I'm not thinking. And because I think that I find that, I mean, again, my best work is always my best work for non-client work, which I just have to wear a different hat for that. Um, and I'm taking on someone else's aesthetic a lot of the time. But for my own personal work, just for what it's worth, I shoot almost entirely on medium format film. So mostly the Mamiya 645 Pro, but also the RZ67, and I have a Pentax 17 that I have a love-hate relationship with, and then the Canon EOS system. I have an Lens 7, and I shoot virtually all personal work on film. And my hit rate with film is so much better than digital, and so it's curious. I mean, am I just better at decisive moments with the film cameras because you got to slow down, and for a number of other reasons? I mean, just the experience of shooting them is so much less digital, and obviously, no kidding. But there's, I mean, our lives are very digital. So when you take that out of the equation, and you're just, with you and a camera that has, a battery in it, admittedly, but like 1990s technology, it's a very relaxing experience in comparison. And I do find that I feel less and less, interestingly, there's, I feel it's a paradox, because I feel more in control of when I take the shot, and that it also happens, closer to automatically, and I'm faster, and I'm predicting quicker. And I think that means that, I'm very much in the feeling, in the moment of the scene, and I'm happy to just bet it on one shot. I mean, I don't even use a motor drive on it. I hand crank it always. And and in my professional work, I'm using the Canon EOS-R system, and I shoot a ton of shots. At an event, I'll shoot 3,000 or 4,000 shots, on it, like, regularly, just because I can't stop working, and I keep just digging in and trying to, I'm trying to serve my client as best I possibly can. And I enjoy event work. And so, but with home and personal, I mean, it's, give me the 6x7 or the 645, and that much slower experience where I can breathe, and and the shots and the pictures really just come, and they are always, ever more on target for what I'm, trying to achieve through these shots. And a lot of that now is, creating this record of my daughter's youth. And so I have a 3-year-old kiddo. And, part of the reason I'm doing this series anyhow is I want to have a record to teach her what I think about, photography, and I want to write a book on photography. And I think the best way for me to get it out is to actually just talk about these topics and then put it all together. And but I want her to know what I think, and so I'm kind of sharing this with her, but also with all of you at the same time. And I think we could just use more content, where we're talking about the philosophy and approach to photography rather than just the technical side of it, because I've been very fortunate and used a lot of great cameras, and yet the ones that I would rather shoot personally are slow medium format cameras from the 90s that I just find are very straightforward and get out of my way, and are reliable, and I don't have to worry about stuff so much, and they're pretty inexpensive to replace compared to others. And so I'm very practical in that sense, and I'm very much like, when it really comes down to everything, it's just that timing of the shutter. That's my my whole life, it seems like I is focused on that, and the and it's and it's sort of the looser you can get, the better, so that it's just so it happens without hesitation, without nerves, without any of that. It happens exactly when it needs to happen. And I think that is, it's all subjective, and but it's, it's based on what you want, and it's based on, how successful you are in judging human behavior and prediction. And photography is an amazing place to do that. There's trade-offs by doing it. I mean, you give up the present moment, to the art of taking 3 dimensions and time and collapsing them into a 2-dimensional image that you can share forever. It's pretty cool, and we should all do more of it. And well, I look forward to being back here in the next one with you. And thanks for listening to this. These are going to be just me talking, and maybe a few photos, and I'll cut out the gaps, but this is going to go on in different places. It's not a tight video, and my other content will be that. But for these videos, I think it's my ADHD brain is going to need to meander, and if I tried to control it too much, I'd just never be able to get all of these out. And I think there can be value in these kind of free-form conversations now and then. So please leave a comment below about your experience and the your thoughts about the decisive moment, and how has it impacted your photography. Do you wish you'd never heard about it? Are you glad you have? Just please share, because I'm deeply curious about that. And well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching the photo files and for spending some time with me today. Please hire me for your photographic needs. My email address and website are on the screen. And check out the related videos on screen right now for more photo files adventures. And thank you for watching.